we should take the lead in showing people that we can be responsible and protect public health and safety at the same time, because my view is that one of the fundamental roles of government is to protect public health and safety. I mean, it talks about that in the Constitution. It talks about the preamble to the Declaration, all those things, the general welfare and health and well-being and life and happiness. And I think there are some places where common sense will work. I think background checks, universal background checks make sense. You know, for example, I think 22% or somewhere in that vicinity of guns are purchased without background checks. You know, if 22% of people could drive a car without taking a driver's test and getting a driver's license, there'd be carnage on the highways. Nobody would accept that. So I think it's reasonable for us to expect to be able to do that with firearms. Age limits as well. You know, when we bought our children their first rifles, you know, they didn't go out at 14 or 11 or 12 and buy them themselves. Mom and dad did it for them. We made sure that they were locked up safely. We made sure that they were responsible and took, you know, hunter safety. And I think there should be limits on what age people can buy firearms at, and, you know, the kind of training that you should have. So it's just sort of common sense stuff that we do here in Wyoming, and that I think people around the country can sort of maybe take some hints from. But by the same token, you know, it's pretty clear that you're not allowed to own a nuclear weapon or a shoulder-fired Stinger missile. There are limits on the Second Amendment. You know, Antonin Scalia, in his decision in the case Heller versus D.C., where basically he wrote for the first time ever in the history of our country that there was an explicit individual right to bear arms, he wrote about the fact that there were limitations on the Second Amendment, just like there are in all the other Bill of Rights amendments, and that certain weapons were probably not appropriate, certain military weapons. And you know what? He's a pretty conservative guy, but I don't disagree with him there. So I think we can do both.
So one of the issues that you note also on your website is about the internet and net neutrality. And I believe I read that you had at one point been the CFO of an internet service provider. And so I wonder if you could sort of talk us through a little bit about this issue of net neutrality and its importance, and, you know, what you bring coming from that background in that industry to, you know, thinking about those issues.
Yes, I was the CFO of and a co-founder of an internet service provider back in the early days, kind of dial-up and DSL, and when a lot of things were changing. And, you know, the internet is really important to us here in Wyoming because we're geographically challenged. And I mean that in the sense that we have a lot of rural communities that are far away from anywhere else. So, you know, Intel is not going to come into Buffalo, Wyoming, or Sheridan, Wyoming, and build a huge manufacturing plant for computer chips, for example. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the employment base. It's just not going to happen. But if you do go to Buffalo, Wyoming, I visited not that long ago a company, a mom and pop, you know, a couple that had started an organic baby clothing company. And they sourced organic cotton and organic fibers, and they had the materials, you know, made into baby clothes, and then they shipped them, and they took orders, and they did it all over the internet. And I think in Wyoming especially, but across the country, the ability to do an incredible amount of things from a business perspective, or what you guys are doing with podcasts, or you name it, is critically important as we move forward into the future. It's important to our economy. It's important to our ability to talk with each other. And so ubiquitous broadband, I think, is a necessity. And I think that it's gotten to the point where it's much like landlines in terms of the utility that they bring and the way they should probably, frankly, be regulated, in the sense that what we don't want, I think, is we don't want incredibly large corporations like, I don't know, Comcast or Verizon, the folks that own the pipes, AT&T of the internet, to be able to determine who gets ahead and who doesn't get ahead because they've got control. That's not the way it should be, and I don't think it's the way we need to run our economy and our business. So I think net neutrality, the concept that you have the same ability to get on the internet at the same speeds as, you know, whether you're a mom and pop or whether you're a huge corporation, is something that should be sort of ensconced in law and in our regulatory structure, because it's a great equalizer. And certainly for Wyoming, again, in our remote communities, it's incredibly important. And one of the things that we face here, one of the problems is, you know, Torrington, Wyoming, a community of somewhere in the vicinity of 3,000 people. AT&T and Verizon is just never going to come in and make the capital investment to put in truly high-speed fiber type of internet without, frankly, government help, because the return on investment is not there for them. The return that they can get from selling to a small community will never pay off for the investment. So that's that's what government should be doing, right? It does collectively what we can't do individually. And that's one of the places I think these days where we need the government to step up through grants or direct action and make sure that A, there's ubiquitous broadband across this country, and B, it protects the rights of everybody to use it on an equal footing. So to me, it's critical, and having that experience taught me that, really.
This isn't a political question, but if you had to recommend
go for it.
A place in Wyoming to visit, what would your favorite place to visit in Wyoming be?
All right, so I'm going to give you two places, if that's okay.
Yes.
I live in Jackson Hole, and if you've never been to Jackson Hole, it is truly one of the wonders of the world. Our two sons are young adults now, but my wife Terry and I have spent every day of their lives telling them how lucky they were to actually be growing up in a place like this. I mean, we've got 14,000 foot mountains. We've got wildlife, like I said, running all over the place. It's really spectacular and incredible. So I would make that one of the places to visit. So the other place is there's a mountain range called the Bighorn Mountains in central Wyoming that's really not very well known. There's a super small community called Ten Sleep, Wyoming, it's just beautiful. There's a canyon when you come out of the mountains. It's super small, but there is a brew pub in Ten Sleep called the Ten Sleep Brewery. And you know what? I can't think of a better place in the world to sit and have a good beer and watch the pronghorn antelope run in the front yard in the front field in front of the brewery and watch the world go by. It's really incredible. And if you go over the Bighorns to the other side, the east side of the Bighorns, there are a couple of communities, Buffalo and Sheridan, which are also beautiful communities as well. But there's a lot of hidden gems in Wyoming, especially because there aren't a lot of people that people don't know about.
I have been to Wyoming, mostly just to Yellowstone, but yeah, it's gorgeous, gorgeous place.
Yeah, it's a cool place. For my wife and I, who were, born and raised in New York State, I started coming out as a kid, and I convinced her, we met in New York City, and I convinced her to, let's try it for a year and we can always go back. And that was 29 years ago. And we still look at each other and say it's the best thing we ever did. Maybe not the best thing politically, but certainly the best thing from a life perspective.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we talk about?
No, I think this is one of those years that's very similar to 2006 when I ran, before. People are fed up. People don't like what's going on. There's this whole D versus R thing. I mean, if I make the race about Democrats versus Republicans, I lose. There's no reason for me to even start because there's more Republicans than there are Democrats in this state. But if you are willing to engage people and talk to them about, what people are angry, and they're angry because it's not working for them. I mean, one of my big issues is the economy, right? And everyone talks about it growing at 4% of GDP. And my response, it's sort of my guy walks into a bar story. But, there's a Wall Street CEO walks into a bar and 9 of his employees are there and they each make $30,000 a year and they're commiserating with each other. And he walks in, he makes $10 million a year. And all of a sudden, the average income in that bar goes from $30,000 a year to over $1 million a year. But there's only one guy making it, and that's the boss. There's only one person making it. And I think that's our economy today. And, we see it here in Wyoming. We're very boom bust here in Wyoming based on energy, but we see it around the country. And if we don't get a handle on that, we're going to be in a whole world of hurt going down the road. My kids' generation is the first generation that in all likelihood won't be as well off as their parents. Mm-hmm. And, that's not something to look forward to. And that's not it's not the way it should be. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think people see that. And I think if you're willing to be honest with them and, just tell them who you are and what you believe in and you're willing to listen, you can go a long way. There is one thing I do that we can't find any other candidate in the country that does this. I go on Facebook Live every Sunday evening, usually at about 5:30 Mountain Time. And I do what we call Trauner time. And I answer any question from anybody who asks on any subject matter, and I give an honest answer. We don't pre-screen. I don't plant people in the audience. You can tell because people type in their questions and you can see what they're typing in. And I'm transparent. And we literally can't find anyone else doing it. And I think that's the way you gain people's trust. So we're just going to keep doing that, and 30 some odd days to go and see what happens.
And you're going to shock the country when you win in November.
We are going to shock the country when we win in November. You know, I came super close once before, and I think it's a battle, but it can be done. And we'll just keep fighting. And
if our listeners want to help you fight that battle, how can they do that?
They can go to my website at www.trauner, TRAUNER, Trauner4WY.com. Click on that donate button. It's easy to do. And, you know, I'm not taking any corporate money. I've been endorsed by End Citizens United. The way I'm going to win this is small donations from everyday people. And I don't want to be bought and paid for. I don't want to feel like I'm bought and paid for. Yeah, I ask some pretty simple questions. You know, why do seniors in this country pay more for their drugs than they should? And one of the reasons, in my view, is that, you know, my opponent's taken money from 34 different big pharma packs. Mm-hmm. And he has no interest in making sure that Medicare can negotiate drug prices with big drug companies, as has been proscribed by law, by Congress. So corporate influence is something we need to fight in a big, big way.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us. And I think this is pretty exciting. And I think this is definitely one of those under the radar kind of races that people could be really surprised about.
It is totally. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we want to be I want to be folks nationally starting to think that it's worth dumping money in here. It makes it a little tougher for me sometimes to raise money because people are like, I don't read about Wyoming. But, you know, I think I've got a track record. And again, anyone who's seen me speak or who I get in front of, I feel pretty comfortable that I can convince. So it's just a matter of, can I meet 100,000 people? Because honestly, I need 100,000 votes to win a United States Senate seat. There isn't even a state in the country there isn't a House district in the country that needs that few votes to win a race. So it's like, and a Wyoming seat counts just as much as Florida or California or New York or anywhere else. So I'm like, what a potentially great return on investment, right? Small dollar, low vote total, go for it. Anyway, thanks for having me, Kelly and Sophie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
and I'm happy to talk anytime.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll be really excited to watch you win your race in Wyoming in November.
Truly appreciate it, you guys. Really, really thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.